2, 1.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Dixon Historic Theater. My name is Jeremy England, the Executive Director at the Dixon Chamber of Commerce in Main Street, and I will be the moderator for tonight's candidate forum. Tonight's forum is for the Dixon City Council, in which there are 2 seats available with 4 individuals running for office. Let me explain how this forum will proceed for the candidates and those viewing from home. Candidates will be given a limited amount of time for each segment in tonight's forum. It is essential for candidates to understand to stay within those allotted time limits given. The candidates will know their time remaining and when their time is expired by the tablet sitting at my table. The forum will proceed in 3 phases: opening statements, questions, and closing statements. Each of the candidates will be given statements in ballot order. These opening statements will last no more than 4 minutes. I, the moderator tonight, will present questions to the candidates. Responses will be held to 90 seconds per question. After questions, we will move to closing statements, which will be held to 2 minutes each. Again, there are 4 candidates tonight running for 2 4-year terms. I will introduce the candidates in order of their ballot listing. The candidate will be sitting from this order from left to right. First, Dennis H. Considine, Benjamin Nagy, Ryan Marshall, and Christopher Bishop. Thank you all for being here tonight, and at this time we're going to move to opening statements. Candidates, again, you will have no more than 4 minutes for each of your statements. Mr. Considine, you have the floor for your opening statement.
Thank you very much. I'll get right to the meat of my presentation for you. During my 4 years on the City Council, we paved the way to success, literally. Take a drive around town with me in my little black Jeep with all the signs all over it. And we'll go down through the most beautiful, lovely community there is. The curbs are repaired, the storefronts have business names on them rather than for lease signs, and the ones that can and have open signs in the windows. Over the next few months, we're going to reopen all our businesses, and we're going to do so safely. More are going to move in, and we'll continue a business, arts, and cultural destination. Now keep driving with me on those nice roads that we have, especially those ones over at Ann Avenue. My goodness, that place has been taken care of in 30 years, and we took care of it. We're okay, we're back down to the I-88 corridor, and we'll see those 27 acres of restaurants, gas stations, and lodging that's going to be developed for this community. Those businesses will create jobs and crucial revenue. With your vote, I'll continue what we've done the past 4 years. We're going to keep developing our local economy and keep our charming little city a vibrant destination, what's otherwise an arts and cultural desert. There's no magic wand that you can wave to make a city as great as Dixon is. With myself on the council, we developed our great relations with the police, fire, park district, as well as the school district, our Chamber of Commerce. I've done business in Dixon for 53 years, so no one knows better than I do how important those relationships are. I also know how hard it is to stay in business and to have success for so long. My heart goes out to the business owners who are struggling right now. That's why it's been a high priority of mine to get our grants and implement cutting-edge programs to support our local businesses. All through the city, we've donated over $450,000 with the city and LCIDA. Again, take a strong relationship to make that happen. In this case, we worked with the Chamber as well as the county's Industrial Development Association to get our resources they need. Kevin Marks in that area and Mr. England and the Chamber have done a marvelous job of expanding our industrial needs. I'm proud of the example we set in keeping our community safe during the pandemic. As soon as we hit, we huddled with KSB, Lee County Health Department, Lee County Emergency Management, and the Lee County State's Attorney to create the Lee County Unified Command Team. We became the trusted source for our community, for both our residents and businesses to keep them healthy. People are more valuable in infrastructure. And we have the best people in Dixon. Every single one of them count, in my opinion. And to help them, our community thrive, we've taken care of most of our roads, we've overhauled the water mains and infrastructure, the sewer, City Hall remodel at the cost of engineers held back $1 million we saved. I firmly believe we can come back even stronger after this pandemic. We are going to be compassionate to each other, and we're going to have an appetite for events like never before. Here's one campaign promise, and I'm not much on campaign promises, but this one I'll give to you. Petunia Festival 2020 is going to be the biggest party of the century. We've done so many great things in the past 4 years. Whether it be big or small, it still will be the greatest party. But there's a lot more to do, and that's why I humbly ask for your vote and the opportunity to keep things done.
Thank you, Mr. Considine.
You're most welcome.
Mr. Nagy, you have the floor for your opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. England. Good evening, fellow constituents of Dixon. My name is Ben Nagy. First, I want to thank you for allowing me to express my sincere love for our great city and share with you the various opportunities I feel we have ahead for our city and community. As a lifelong member of the community, I'm invested in the future of our great city. I have 2 young children in local schools, a wife who works as a registered nurse at KSP, and myself as a small business owner. As a financial representative for Country Financial, I've experienced firsthand what it takes to successfully run a business and maintain a budget. With my prior experience on a Dixon Park District Board, volunteering in various other community organizations, and fiscal responsibility as a business owner, I believe I'm the right choice to lead as your councilman. I think the opportunities our city has coming down the pipeline are more advantageous and real than ever before. Coming out of this pandemic has not been easy for any one person or any one city, but I feel we need to seize the opportunities ahead of us for economic development and be on the front edge in doing so, more so than any other surrounding communities or city. Transparency, fiscal responsibility, and community partnership. That is my pledge, and I look forward to expressing these values to you throughout tonight's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nagy. Mr. Marshall, you have the floor for your opening statement.
Okay. Does he want to reset that? Since being elected in 2017, we have and will have seen 244 blocks of city streets resurfaced in the last 3 years plus this coming year. That's 23% of all city streets in a 4-year span, when most cities have looked at maybe 2 to 3% at any given time, hopefully. That's $7 million that's been spent from motor fuel tax funds, 0.5% sales tax infrastructure funds, federal service transit funds, and another $3.1 million slated for this year to keep updating our roads and infrastructure. That's $10 million, a little over $10 million in a 4-year stretch. So we have started a large expansion also on the I-88 corridor that will see big jumps in our sales tax and property tax numbers for years to come. Seeing the EPA come in and spend over $2 million on cleaning up the old scrapyard, opening that riverfront area to new economic expansion. And like tonight, we are live streaming council meetings also, which I've been pushing for the last 2 years. As an informed and engaged electorate is better for everybody. It keeps us in the know of what you guys are wanting to see and lets you guys see what we are working on. And since this pandemic began a year ago, like Councilman Considine said, we've given out a little bit over $450,000 to local businesses to keep them afloat, along with LCIDA. But in the coming years, we need to continue our focus on growth, tapping into our beautiful surroundings and building up our recreational tourism in partnership with Chamber Main Street to Park District to help promote our parks, trails, our coming entertainment, hunting, fishing, bike paths, everything. We have a lot to offer. Working with developers to identify land that will be best to work with on building up areas that can be turned into campgrounds, and as well as vacation homes, rentals, so people can come from out of city limits in to enjoy us. Like I said, I've also, along with the recreational tourism, I've been pushing for a residential development to be brought from the back burner to the front. One of the biggest complaints I hear from the under 40 Dixonites is the lack of available homes. A house goes on the market and seems to get gobbled up immediately, or in some cases, never even hits the market. Gets shown even beforehand, and it's bought up. We need to identify these needs and expand our infrastructure to new areas of our town to expand our housing opportunities for younger families to purchase and build on. And while this pandemic threw an unprecedented wrench into business as usual for everyone, we were very fortunate to be in a place financially to be able to get much accomplished still. What this has shown, though, is that urban rush might turn into an urban retreat. A lot of things you've been reading is businesses allowing people to work from home now. So if we can expand our housing options, and very importantly, our fiber network, we can position Dixon as one of the go-to cities for people wanting to get away from their packed-in stress of everyday city life and move to a town that is more warm and welcoming, while also having easy access to Chicago and the Quad Cities. We have accomplished so much in the last 4 years, and I look forward to working with the rest of the council and the administration on taking Dixon to new heights. I'm excited to be part of that, and would love your support in the upcoming election to keep doing this amazing work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Mr. Bishop, you have the floor for your opening statement.
Thank you very much. First off, I want to say I just appreciate all the folks that are up here and then the folks that are watching at home. Just like all the rest of these folks that are up here, I've been in Dixon a long time. I chose to come back here after I went to college, and I've been fortunate enough to work at Dixon Public Schools. At one point, I was actually on the council in 2015. I served one term. During that time, we had that transition of government to the city manager form we're currently in. I did not seek re-election during that point, but since then, in 2019, I reached out to the city wanting to help out and be a part of the city again, and was able to become a member of the city's planning commission. And I've been there, like I said, since 2019. Now, in my opinion, the two most important things the council does is, one, they set the budget. Because when you set the budget, you're setting what you're going to do overall for the next year. You're showing the importance because you're putting the money where your mouth is. Two, I believe that giving the city staff direction by creating policy and ordinances is a way they can get done. You set the stage for what you see as the most important things, and then allow the staff that's very good at their job to do their job. You empower them. In my opinion, some of the biggest things that we have currently going on in the city, the Gateway project, which was already spoken about, I do give the city a lot of credit there. What we have going on with the pandemic, we're still going through, so we're having businesses that are coming, that are reopening, that we need to support. And then also going back to that Gateway project, bringing in those new businesses and making sure they have enough support, not only going into it, but after they arrive, to continue and sustain themselves. Another thing that's going to be big going on into the future for us is the House Bill 3653, which deals with our police department. There's going to be some mandates that's going to happen to our police department to change the way that they do things. And one of the major things is going to be funding. We know this is going to come down in 2025, where they're going to need cameras. And probably one of the biggest things is not the expense of the cameras, but it's going to actually be the storage of the video that's brought on. And I know this because we've talked about it before when I was on the council, and then the council once again has brought this issue up since that bill has passed. And so I see those are some of those things that are coming up. We also know there's some financial burdens that are coming down the road. Probably not in the next 4 years, but shortly after that, we're going to see the IMRF and the Social Security costs start to go up. So just looking into the future, we know those costs are there, and just we need to be mindful of those as we go through. And we have people working on that. If you support me on April 6th, you are going to get a councilman that listens to both sides of every issue that comes before him. And I will do that before I reach a conclusion on those. I'm a person of very little ego, and my agenda heading into this race is very simple. Support those who have been here and promote those who are willing to come here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. Again, thank you to all the candidates. At this time, we will now move to questions submitted by the community and the media. Again, each of you will have the chance to respond to each question that I ask. Please wait until I call upon you for your response, and please hold your questions or your answers to 90 seconds. This time, let us begin. I will start with Dennis Considine. How have you already been volunteering or serving in the community? And what is your motivation for seeking re-election?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Sure. How have you already been volunteering or serving within the community, and what is your motivation for seeking re-election?
Thank you very much. That's a very loaded, long question for me. I've been a citizen of this community all my life. I've served on the Chamber of Commerce when it was the original Chamber of Commerce, when it was in the bus depot down on the Main Street. And we did all the promotions. I did that. I was on the Downtown Merchants Association. I volunteer for anything that someone needs help with, that's what I do. I did spend 25 years of my life as a veteran community. I came and went, and I didn't pay attention as much as I could have or should have possibly. But what I'm doing now, it's for the love of my community, and that's why I'm running. I've lived here, as I said, I'm the 7th generation, and that's the story. You get what you see, and that's it.
Thank you, Dennis. Mr. Nagy, how have you already been volunteering or serving within our community? And what is your motivation for seeking election?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. England. Currently, I am a Republican precinct committeeman. As a precinct committeeman, we act as a liaison between state government and local government. We bring in state representatives to share what's going on downstate and see how we can support them from a local level, and also how that will affect our city and our community. I'm currently a Kiwanis member, prior Kiwanis board member as well, and have volunteered in other various organizations across the community throughout the years. I participated in many community outreach events and organizations throughout my high school tenure, and was able to gain a good understanding of what we have in this community and how we could continue to utilize our time to make it a better place.
Thank you, Mr. Nagy. Mr. Marshall, how have you already been volunteering or serving within the community, and what is your motivation for seeking re-election?
I'll drop the mask this time because I could tell I was muffled last time. Service I've already committed into the community is, while currently sitting on the Dixon City Council. In the past, I served on the Lee County Board, filling a seat that had opened up, as well as a member of the Dixon Chamber of Commerce, the Dixon One Task Force, the Dixon Main Street, Sauk Valley Leadership Board, and Dixon Junior Dukes Board of Directors for a short time. And just that kind of experiencing a little bit of everything has always been beneficial. The leadership board is actually something I was really proud of, because it was the first time the 3 chambers of Dixon, Sterling, and Rock Falls that came together to work together in a cohesive unit. And I think it was a really big piece of it. My motivation is, 4 years, you sit there, and when I got out, I was like, 4 years, you can get a ton done. And 4 years is just a start. You quickly learn there's a lot to do. And I'd like to continue working harder on that and continuing to promote Dixon and building it up and helping to make everybody's lives here a little bit better and giving them activities to do, as well as obviously working with our administration on the streets and the infrastructure of it. So that's kind of my motivation, is to continue moving forward.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Mr. Bishop, same question to you. How have you already been volunteering or serving within our community, and what is your motivation for seeking election?
Yeah, I would start off with just being on the council in the past. When I did that, I just felt like it was a moment where I could give back and have a little say in what was going on. Like I said, in 2019, I reached out to Lee and actually asked him if there was anything open on any of the boards, and that's how I ended up on the Planning Commission. Obviously, my job, teaching, that's all about service. There's not a young person that's probably under the age of 12 years old that's in the public schools that I haven't interacted with, and I would say in a positive way. So that calling of service has always kind of been there. For those that know me, they know I'm heavily involved in the wrestling scene. I'm the Dixon High School coach, but I'm also involved with our middle school kids. I'm also involved with the kids club that's there. So to me, when we talk about service, one of the things that I think about is that's a way to really put yourself out there and give back. And so I see the council as the same mode of how can I give more to the broader spectrum of Dixon, Illinois, and putting my voice in there with the different experiences that I've had. That's why I want to go forward. It's basically I have more to give, and I like the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. For the next question, I'm going to start with Mr. Nagy. What collaborative efforts and partnerships are currently successful within our community, and what needs to be strengthened?
I think one of the major ones currently is the collaborative efforts between the Park District and the current city government. A major thing that we've been discussing throughout the years, going back to when I was on the Park District Board, is a community center. And the director, Mr. Long, did attend one of the recent city council meetings and expressed his interest in partnering with city council. I think that's something that needs done. I firmly believe it's something that we need as a community for our younger population. The community center is something families look for when determining which community they would like to raise their family, which community they would like to move to. We're one of few surrounding communities that do not have a community center, and without one, I feel we are deterring the future of our young population. Partnering with Park District Board and other governments would be one avenue we could take in creating this community center. If it does come down to tax dollars where we could not self-fund this, a referendum would be needed. And the great thing about a referendum, in my opinion, is that it is the voice of the citizens speaking their opinion, not us as a council or any other form of government making that decision solely.
Thank you, Mr. Nagy. Mr. Marshall, same question to you. What collaborative efforts and partnerships are currently successful within our community, and what needs to be strengthened?
I think Ben touching on the current working relationship between the Park District and the City Council has been very big. I've been a big fan of helping to be a part of that. But I think that's also just a start. Before the pandemic hit, I started having a little bit of a conversation with some school board members and some SAWC board members as to find a way that we could start potentially working together as a whole. You know, whatever is going to help one will benefit all of us, from the Sauk Valley Board of Trustees to the Park District to the school district to the Rural Fire Commission. You know, all of us can work together to help maybe promote each other a little bit, as well as get rid of some redundancies that we all fall into sometimes. And that's something that has started getting tapped into. Then pandemic kind of showed up and pushed everything back a little bit. It's something I'm hoping to keep expanding on over the next 4 years.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Mr. Bishop, what collaborative efforts and partnerships are currently successful within our community, and what needs to be strengthened?
Well, I'll give you a great example, and you're part of the example actually, is the Chamber in Main Street has really changed since I've been on the council. That Dixon One concept started to come in, and it's been there before that. But we started to see the transition start to happen. And I think it's brought people to a great place. As a community, now we have events that are lined up and we're not overlapping one another. And I think our resources are being used responsibly. So I would like to see things like that happen between the schools, the Park District, the city themselves, and I think we're going that way. I mean, the Park District has done a lot in the last couple of years. We all know that. We've seen it. You know, I've got 2 kids. The expansion of what they're able to do is there. I know Main Street and the Chamber, sometimes the reason that we don't see as much this year is because we're in the middle of a pandemic. But I think one of the things that we can do moving forward is use that model of, once again, and it's a lot like we've already heard, is taking those resources that are there and trying to maximize them as much as possible. And who needs what and how does it need to be dispensed? And that's going to be another thing where people just have to put the egos to the side and just come up with the idea of, this is what we have to do or what we want to do. Now, let's figure out who plays what role, and let's let them do it.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. Mr. Considine, what collaborative efforts and partnerships are currently successful within our community, and what needs to be strengthened?
Well, I'm going to start with the bottom and go backwards. I think that the strides that we've made with the Lee County Board has needed some support and guidance from us, is cooperating with the city and other agencies. And I believe that they're in a position now to be more open and willing, and I think that's a wonderful thing for our community going forward. The second thing is the LCIDA, or LACIDA, as the mayor puts, so he has his Mexican Latino twist on it, and makes us as more diversified community as we are. And that enterprise zone, and that's been a good relationship, and it's brought fruit to us. The other is the KSB and the health department. We work very well with both those organizations, and they give us guidance and direction going forward. And the school district is a huge one for us. They've donated us that land for us, and we've now been able to put some needed housing and development place there, as Mr. Marshall alluded to. And in turn, they will get their tax money back because we'll have more houses to be taxed. And not that I'm a fiend about taxes, but that's the reality, that if you have a building, it gets taxed, and that's how the school district gets their revenue. And the last, that's been touched by other members here, is the park district. And I think what started all that was the water splash pads with private donation.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Considine. Next question will go to Mr. Marshall. The topic of the Dixon Municipal Band keeps generating discussion and is frequently in the news. What is your position in terms of city support of this organization, which has been part of the Dixon landscape since 1851, moving forward?
Sorry, I'm finding my glasses. The Dixon Municipal Band, the funding for it was, I believe, in the tax levy, I want to say 10 or 11 years ago, and the fund has been slowly kind of dwindling down. The city does need to show some support for the band, but I've actually been pushing for them to possibly start doing some more pay-to-play, I guess you could say, paid performances. Help them build up some revenue on their own so that they aren't solely dependent on the council and on the city tax dollars. And something I've also brought up in the past and floated out there is the idea of, you have the Dixon Municipal Band, the Sterling Municipal Band, as well as other bands around the area, is maybe consolidating them down into one to be able to use the communities around us to better promote and better utilize this band and not rely on each one individually paying for it and their own little band and their own band members. So I would like to see a kind of a greater Sauk Valley Municipal Band that I believe would be able to be beneficial, not just for Sterling, Dixon, Rock Falls that have the bands, as well as maybe in Oregon and Amboy, Morrison and such. So that's kind of my thought on the process, is hopefully in time is building that into one big conglomerate of municipal bands.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Mr. Bishop, the topic of the Dixon Municipal Band keeps generating discussion, is frequently in the news. What is your position in terms of city support of this organization, which has been part of the Dixon landscape since 1851, moving forward?
Yeah, the topic of the band has come up, it seems like every year. When I was on the council, we had the same thing, talking about the band. I believe, is it 20,000 or 21,000 that's left after 21,000. So I actually reached out to John James, and I posed this question, and I think he's still getting a response. This was just recently here. Without anything else being said, one of the questions that I posed to him was, if it's $21,000, and let's say you've got 2 years before maybe the city's going to decide what they're going to do again, would you rather have that $21,000 now and then budget it out for yourself for 2 years? Or would you rather see the city give you 10 or 11 now and then 10 or 11 next year in order to do that? Now, that doesn't solve the issue overall, but I do think it allows them to kind of have a little say and input as what they want to do. I do think that as the council, the new one comes in, this is something they're going to have to talk about. One of the other things maybe to look at for the city-wise, if we want to make sure that the band is making sure they get some money out of this, is look at the performances that they do, try to pick how many we want done if we have to cut back, and then say, what's your expenses for that amount? And then know that going forward if we don't want to do the full 20,000. And like I said, I think when the new council comes in, whoever that may be, that's obviously an issue you're going to have to look at. But maybe if we break it into smaller pieces, we might come up with something.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. Mr. Considine.
The band, everybody
All right.
plays the band.
There we go.
I like that. big trombone that went through that stage show, Bring It to Town. Well, I'm a big proponent for the band, as you all well know, but after doing further investigation, the city band is in much better condition than we thought it was. So even if we only gave them $5,000 this year, they still are in sturdy place to make their performances and do what they need to do. And nobody has the crystal ball to how many performances they can do. I don't want you to think for 1 minute that I'm wobbling on the importance of the city band, because I could go on to you with the family, what it teaches children, how it gets them involved, how it gets family partying, because I've had people say, well, why does everything in Dixon have to revolve around a beer party and a fest and a carrying? And this is good, clean American fun that has great history. So my position on it still is that we fund them. And you know, if they run out of money and they need help, the city council at Dixon is always there to help. That's what we're for. So I think they need to look at the number of performances they're going to do, as it's been said, and the parades and the activity and the play for pay, and make it go. So it's still a very viable situation for me. And again, that helps for me getting back with our city controller and financial officer, and she put me instead that they have plenty of money, and I still have 2 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Considine. Mr. Nagy, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, I'll take it from
All
there.
right,
Thank
great.
you, Mr. England. So a few of the candidates have spoke some of what I do have in my notes. I think the hard part is the most discussed topic that I have ran across in my campaigning is the budget. Part of budgeting is what money are you going to allocate and where are you going to allocate it. We have to make sure that it makes sense to allocate monies to things that will be effective and have a good return on their investments. Seed money is great. As discussed, we have the $21,000. I think it's important to work directly with the new director to see if he does want that up front, if he has a higher cost fixed or a higher cost expense initially, or if he does want us to spread that out across the 3 years. I know that we need to take a close look at it as a council when the new council is elected and make a decision as a group. I think we need to also work with the band and ensure that we can partner with them in fundraising and becoming somewhat self-sufficient, like other surrounding community municipal bands are. The other thing about that is being able to get out there and be able to become self-sufficient would also come along with promoting the band. And one thing that would do then is allow them to have higher performances, which would then attract people from surrounding communities, in my opinion, that would then generate revenue. And when that is done, then I feel we could come back to the drawing board as a council and decide how we would like to revisit the situation with the band and allocation for the monies.
Thank you, Mr. Nagy. Speaking of budget, new question, Mr. Bishop. Leading up to this election, City Council has worked through and finalized the budget. Do you agree with the direction and allocations that have been made? And if not, what would you have done differently?
Well, let me just say this. They've worked hard at it, because I've watched every single minute of the film that they had during their budget sessions. I think they're in order. I'm going to give the credit to the council quite a bit for what happened over the pandemic. They pulled money back from spending, which I think was a very smart move. They put Dixon in a great spot. For me, I do like most of the things that are done. I would probably, for the theater part of it, would probably have to sit down a little bit more and get a little bit more in depth into what they want to do and how that looks like. And then obviously those culture funds, just like I'm talking about, those are the things that I would just need more information on. I'm not seeing a glaring hole. I do believe that the council that we've had has done a nice job with budget, especially through the pandemic, like I said. And so this budget year that they're coming back into, the zero budgeting that they're doing is the proper approach. I like the turn-ins that they're bringing in, and they're talking about the future and what they want to be able to do from year to year, bringing those turn-ins in every year to be able to make sure that we're in the right spot. Another thing that I like that they changed, they were at 90% for paying in at one point for pension payment. They've all decided to go to 100, so that probably would have been my biggest push for them. So once again, I give them kudos for that move and restricting the spending. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. Mr. Considine, Same question to you. Leading up to this election, City Council has worked through and finalized the budget, which you were a part of. Do you agree with the direction that you guys have agreed upon and where you're at and the allocations that have been made? And if not, what would you have liked to seen differently in the process?
I don't think we've ever had the opportunity in the 12 years that I've been involved in, 10 years, excuse me, not 12, 10 years that I've been involved in city money. I was there for the unfortunate situation. I saw the transition proposition go through, and now I've seen the last 4 years my council. We have the most competent financial director that we've ever had. Her presentation to the council was right on the money, easy to understand. All of our department heads, they've all taken a very conservative approach to how they're spending their money and why. Our city administrator and assistant city administrator were very active with these people, and I think we're in a rosy position. As Mr. Bishop alluded to earlier, yes, there are things coming down the pike that we're going to have to be paying attention to, and I think we're in that position to do so. So I'm very much in favor of the current budget that we have and where it is. I've taken my claws back from the band because the band has plenty of money to make their performances this year with our donation. And the backup is that we have that $100,000 in the cultural fund that we could draw from if they need it. And maybe we don't need to do as many of those performances, but the question was to me, do I appreciate the budget and where it's going? And it is absolutely a treat and a joy. After we're off the program, if you'd like to tell me how Rita showed me the first budget, it's enough to make you silly. Oh, I see the red light. Yep, absolutely.
Mr. Nagy, would you like me to repeat the question to you?
No, that's okay.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Again, reiterating with what Mr. Bishop did say, I do commend the current council on the direction that they have gone with this budget, current budget. I think it's setting Dixon up for success. I think in any budget setting, I think it's crucial in crafting it to ensure we pay basic responsibilities first and foremost. Looking back at a council meeting from a few weeks ago, there was discussion as to whether paying 90 or 100% of the pension payments. In my opinion, that shouldn't be a topic of discussion. 100% of payments needs to be paid at all times, since that is part of our basic responsibilities first and foremost. Really, I would want to make sure that we ensure we don't get behind on those basic responsibilities in payments like the state of Illinois has done, and continue on the spectrum that we're on, and make sure that it makes sense that we're spending our money where we are spending it. The one thing that hasn't got brought up is the federal stimulus money that is seated for Dixon, and I think it's important that we invest that in our future and that we look at where we are spending that money. We do have a pipeline of expenses that are coming down in the next 4 to 6 years. I think that's something that we're definitely going to want to look at long-term view, and that's what our budget's all about, is making sure that we circle back to what is our long-term vision and how are we going to allocate the money to make that successful.
Thank you, Mr. Nagy. Mr. Marshall?
Thanks for the endorsement on the budget, guys. When I got on the council 4 years ago, I sat down with the former budget, or not budget director, but finance director, and had a 3-hour meeting to understand the budget, walked out and maybe knew 2 to 3% more than I knew before. It was so, you almost need to have an accounting degree. And the way it is read now, I'm such a big fan of it and how the administration has structured and put it together. I think the budget has come along very well. It's allowed for us to be proactive during the pandemic instead of necessarily having to fall back and cut everything. We were able to still get so much done, and still this year going to be able to get so much done because of the conservative fiscal planning that has been done by this council. The future issues that are coming down the pipeline, from the police body cameras to IMRF to the pension stuff, and the planning is in effect now, and not necessarily cuts that are being made. It is structured now to be able to take those problems, I don't want to say problems, but issues into effect into the future, and I think we've been planning for that for the last 4 years and continue to with this budget.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Mr. Considine, how do you plan to involve the residents of our community in your decision-making process moving forward?
You'll have to repeat that.
Sure. How do you plan to involve the residents of our community in your decision-making process if reelected?
Well, first of all, my telephone is published on all my campaign materials, so I'm open to any time for conversation when it's needed. I've always been right at the end of that telephone or in person when anyone needs to talk to me, and I'm happy to talk to them. And I've made that a pledge as I've gone forward in my service in the time. So I'm very available and there. And I thought you were asking me about the volunteer committees or how to get citizens involved in the city. Did you allude to that at all?
Not in this question.
My ears are playing games on me. But anyway, I'm available 24/7 whenever you need me, and I pride myself in that. So,
Thank you, Mr. Considine. Mr. Nagy, how do you plan to involve the residents of our community in your decision-making process if you are elected to council?
Being a part of the community and the other volunteer organizations that I'm currently a part of gets us out there. Just being in the community and being out and about is something that has helped with taking the input of other community members and being able to hopefully with the new council be able to take those issues to the council and discuss those. An important topic that I think in community engagement would be restarting town hall for involvement from the community, a Q&A session, small business input, other community leader input, and open dialogue in general. I think it's been done well, but I believe especially during this unique time with the pandemic, it's important more than ever to be able to be virtual with not only our meetings, but with our communication, and we need to expand those efforts.
Thank you, Mr. Nagy. Mr. Marshall?
Yes, I think keeping the public informed, obviously, is a big thing. The town halls that were started pre-pandemic were, I thought, very, very good and informative for the public to be able to chime in. Doing the transparency, not the transparency, but doing the live streaming of our council meetings and having people be able to jump in and have their kind of running dialogue in the comments, but also be able to ask comments in there, I think has been a very beneficial piece for us to be able to see. And something I've kind of proposed a little while back to other members of the council individually was the idea of post-council meeting Q&A sessions where one of us would sit down after each council meeting in front of the camera and keep the live stream going and answer any questions that people might have that they didn't want to put into the comment section and into the discourse. That way we can take it in, we can either get it answered then or take it into in for our knowledge and be able to ask the rest of the council members at the next meeting. I think that getting that feedback is massive for the work we do. We have a better understanding of what everybody wants to see done. So that's just some of the little pieces, as well as bringing back the quarterly town halls. I thought that was very, very nice to sit in on.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Mr. Bishop?
I think one of the biggest things, as Ryan's already said, is the live stream. I think that's important. When I was there, it was brought up, and at that point, everybody didn't think that it was possible, but once again, the city of Dixon's proven that it is possible, which is great. The other thing is, obviously, City Hall, you're going to have an email if you're on the council, so email's big. Usually there's a phone number sent to you so you can check those messages, get back to people. And the other big part is just be out in public, which I think most of the folks that are sitting up here are anyways. But being available when someone stops you in the street to talk a little bit about what's going on, stopping in local businesses just to see how people feel it's going, and just having those conversations as you go through. Keep in mind that sometimes, as a council member, you are going to have to go to somebody and bounce some things off some folks. And one of the key things that I always tried to do when I was on the council was try to find someone that isn't in the city government that you may think is one side on one topic, and then find somebody else on the same topic, maybe on the other side, and have that conversation. And all it takes is maybe listening to those two people to kind of start putting your mindset a little bit different. And then, obviously, as yourself being a representative, you have to make that decision. So I think the input part is huge, and you just make yourself accessible.
I did get a call about my extended warranty on my car on my city line.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. Mr. Nagy, there is currently a request from the Park District for $700,000 contribution from the City of Dixon for a community center. Before approving such an expenditure, what will you seek to understand and/or what are your thoughts on this project?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. England. I think we hit on this a couple questions back. Obviously, $700,000 is a big expense of the budget. I think the community center is something that we need in this city, and I think the way to get it done is partnering. That's part of what I've been campaigning on, is partnering with other city governments and other organizations. The idea of the $700,000 is something that would allow the Park District to break ground, if you will, from what I understand. And I think that's the initial phase that we need to be in. Circling back from my time on the Park District Board, during those years, they did run a campaign, a referendum to increase taxes for a community center, which was voted down by the city. I think what Dee is proposing to start a phase series of the community center is something that will help it take off. It won't be the full community center that we are asking for, that we're looking for in the end, but I think it will break ground and it will get people excited in Dixon. I think that it will help attract other folks to the city, and then we can do various phases from there. And like I stated, if it does come down to a referendum, that's the nice thing about the referendum, is once we do issue that, it's the voice of the citizens speaking. So we will not, as a council, raise taxes solely to pay for this, but it will be sent to a referendum, and it will be the decision of our community.
Thank you, Mr. Nagy. Mr. Marshall.
Anybody that's seen kind of my history with the idea of a community center or sports complex, whatever you want to call it, is very obvious that I've been very, very in favor of it. And when the Park District got a hold of each of us on the council to talk about our ideas on this, I got really excited. I love the phased aspect of how they're doing it, where it's not biting off too much, you can chew too early. And I think the city investing into it with them out of the recovery funds, that I view as a one-time use to benefit the citizens of Dixon. The recovery fund shouldn't be used as an ongoing thing, but as a one-time, what's the best impact? And I think this is going to be great impact with those funds, with our citizens, with the children, with adults, with seniors, to be able to have a piece of that we don't have really compared to the rest of surrounding communities. You know, relying on the Armory for years was at the whim of the Armory, and that wasn't going to be sustainable long term. So I've been very, very much in favor of going forward with this partnership with the Park District and working with them for this community center.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Mr. Bishop.
This is probably the spot where, just because being in the position where I am now, I would have to pump the brakes a little bit, because I just don't know enough. I was at the meeting where Dee came over and kind of presented. I do think there is information, a lot more than I know, that is out there. But for myself, I would have to sit through and listen to a lot more than I did, just to know exact plans of how this is going to be. I know he talked about exact size, but I'm someone that's very visual, so I probably need something to show me what that extra square footage looks like compared to maybe even Dixon High School's gym. And then just his plan for who's running it, what you said currently, the staff that he had would cover those things. So I just want to be very thorough, and then I'd have to make a decision on it. So I guess my best answer is I'm not enough in the know of what's going on to be able to really say yes or no on $700,000. So that's just where I'm at right now.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. Mr. Considine, would you like me to repeat the question?
Please.
There is currently a request from the Park District for $700,000 contribution from the city for a community center. Before approving such an expenditure, what will you seek to understand, and what are your thoughts on the project?
Well, it's another example of how we come to understand how the city makes decisions. Mr. Long met with two of the councilors at a time because we had to under the Freedom of Information Act, and he went through it very clearly. And I immediately, as I was not in Mr. Marshall's meeting, said we have to support this, and we have the money in our recovery funds, and this is what that money, in my opinion, should have been used for all along, was to help and give back to the citizens of Dixon, and especially the students or young people. So it's a small step for us, and it's a long-standing issue for our citizens that we have that, to everyone's point about people wanting to move here and why they come here and what they do. So that's my point, is that sometimes when they talk about transparency, we don't come together and just make a decision. We've been informed and followed the guidelines to get to that information and have that form made for us. So it is indeed a great thing for the community, and it's a start. And as they go further, Mr. Long will explain to the citizens how they're doing it with the bonding from the park district. It's not going to cost the taxpayers extra money. They're already there. They're doing a fabulous job in that organization in a short period of time, and my hat goes off to them, especially for Mr. Long and his team.
Thank you, Mr. Considine. Mr. Marshall, if you could make a change in our current zoning code, what would it be and why?
That's a fun question, zoning. Our, actually, the process has kind of begun with our building department and looking into our city zoning and kind of how it is set up currently, and it hasn't really been updated that much over the last couple decades. I've talked to our building inspector Joe May, as well as Tim Shipman, who's our head of our building department, and kind of their thoughts on it and what they would like to see. And I agree with it, is kind of just somewhat getting a couple more designations for certain areas. You have a lot of where it's just broad strokes. This is business, this is industrial, this is residential. That requires a lot of movement within that, and I wouldn't mind seeing a little bit more information from them on how to cut that down a little bit more. Like I said, I've only just kind of started having this conversation a little bit ago, so I'm still learning heavily about it. So,
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Mr. Bishop.
Yeah, I think one of the problems we run into a lot, and I know when I was on the council, is people are upset if something's going on in their neighborhood they don't think should be. But the other part is the city's been here a long time. So sometimes neighborhoods grew up in places that aren't necessarily other houses. And so sometimes we see that issue come up. As far as what I would change, I think Ryan's right. One of the things we'd have to sit down to with the building department and say, what can we do moving forward? And I know that even when I was on the council, they were working on making an overall plan of the city and where we wanted to put things. And I've seen some shifts here and there. But for a clear, concise answer for that, I don't have one simple fix-all. I think what we're going to have to do is just sit down with the people that are in the know and come up with a plan. And that's the best way to start that off.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. Mr. Considine, if you could make a change in our zoning code, what would it be and why?
Well, we're light years ahead of where we were a few years ago in this issue. As it's been alluded to, we have changed our zoning and our books and brought it up to speed. And we're trying to get away from spot zoning. And I'm a big proponent of the building department, the planning commission, and our enforcement person that we put into place, and it's going swimmingly, as they might say. And I think that the collaboration between the landlords, the tenants, and charitable organizations that are willing to get involved is very important. And they're just waiting for us to help them, because I think there's more of a responsibility than just to the landlords. It's also the tenants' responsibility, and we as a community with our zoning and enforcement to make that happen, and it's much better. So I'm excited about that. That's coming. If I'm put on the council again, that's one of the priorities that I want to work with this organization to make it go forward. Thank you very much. And I have time left, my goodness.
Thank you, Mr. Considine. Mr. Nagy.
Could you repeat the question?
Sure. If you could make a change in our zoning code, what would it be and why?
So I think the candidates hit on a lot of things that I have in my notes, and I think updating is one, and working with Tim Shipman on those updates, 'cause nobody does know, the code's better than himself. And I think establishing a broader city plan moving forward for commercial zoning is something that is important to work with the council that is elected. Distinguishing where we zone commercial, especially when it's within residential proximity. That has been some things that have been brought up in the past with commercial zoning so close to housing. and then also get neighborhood views on those businesses and those zones, and be cognizant planning for future zoning. Again, working with the team that we have in place currently and expanding that team, I think it's going to be a series of updates. I think it's going to be a series of events that will go on through the next 4 to 8 years to update that and to continue to look at what makes sense in commercial zoning.
Thank you, Mr. Nagy. Mr. Bishop, what is one major issue that if you were elected into office, you plan to address?
Simple. I've been thinking about this for a while. Actually, I wouldn't call this major, but there's a piece of carpeting that sits right next to Ryan's seat in City Hall that drives me nuts because it's been like that. It just falls over.
I tried.
So the last time I was elected, one of the things I suggested we do was move the benches that were downtown on First Avenue because they face the buildings. They switched them. They face out towards the river. So they seem small, silly, and whatever, but you can fix them real fast. So there's my first issue I'd take care of. So if you glue that, you stole my idea, just so you know.
I've been fighting that for years.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. Mr. Considine, what is one major issue you plan to address if you are reelected to office?
Wow, I have a bag full probably, because I'm going to let go this time because it'll probably be my last one. So I'll be more challenging and exciting than I've ever been. Okay, louder. All right. I think that many of the things that the last issue, especially was the building department and zoning, was a big issue for me. I think that the continued collaboration between our departments, and I'm very excited that we are finally, for once and for all, going to get a new building in the cemetery and give support to that area of the city that's been lacking for many, many years, and go forward with that. So if that happens, and I keep pushing on it from my viewpoint, we still haven't inked the deal yet, and that's what I've been told for my first 4 years, then I skipped 2 years, my last 4 years, and I want to see that get done because it's sort of like the band. It's heritage for our community. All of our loved ones are laid to rest there, and it's very important that we pay attention and are respectful of it. Mr. Phillips and Mr. Spiegel do a great job, but and me personally, I have 1,800 relatives in that cemetery, so that's what brings it to my heart. They were a very prolific people, my family.
Thank you, Mr. Considine. Mr. Nagy, what is one major issue that you plan to address if you are elected to office?
I think it's a combination of the topics that we've discussed tonight, and it's long-term expenses and ensuring that we have those properly allocated for our future expansion of our community. You'll hear more of ensuring that Dixon is somewhere that our kids want to come home to, and having 2 kids of my own. I want Dixon to be a place, even if they do go away for their education, to be at the top of the list for them to come back to. And again, everything is a circle of life with what we discussed tonight for ensuring we have those allocated accordingly and properly, all the way down to the community center, and looking at what other expansions we can do within our community to produce jobs throughout Dixon and to make it a place for our kids to come back to and to grow families that want to come to Dixon and raise their families, open businesses.
Thank you, Mr. Nagy. Mr. Marshall, what is the one major issue you plan to address if you are reelected to office?
Like Dennis said, there's kind of there's a bag of a little bit of everything, and I was kind of back and forth on between recreational tourism and residential development, and I think residential development is the one that could really be big right now. You look around, and I can count with both hands, and still not even come close to have enough ability to count them all. Then the amount of people that are looking for houses, and the options just aren't there. We've kind of backslid a little bit in that one. We haven't been expanding our borders as much for the residential push that we need. I think working with developers, working with Chamber Main Street, working with maybe even LCIDA a little bit on getting some of the information. Blackhawk or the E-Zone, I believe, is working on a residential study right now that I think we really need to work with them on, allowing us to really dig into what Dixon needs. The housing we have here, a lot of it's been aging, and we need to update it. I think that could be very beneficial for young families either moving to town or that are currently in town looking to upgrade a little bit. So that's going to be my big push over the next 4 years is really digging in on a residential development move.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Mr. Nagy, we've all talked about this a little bit throughout the night, you guys have, but what is your vision for Dixon's economic and cultural growth for the next 10 years?
So I think the sky's the limit. I think that we have a good budget opportunity to have the opportunity to create those events and ensure that it's an attraction from surrounding communities in doing so. Can you repeat the second part of that question, please?
Yeah, I'll repeat the whole question. What is your vision for Dixon's economic and cultural growth for the next 10 years?
Yep. So the economic part is the important part, and I think it circles back to the I-88 corridor expansion. I think the different businesses and restaurants that we would have out there and the hotels would attract a certain population of folks that would look to make Dixon their home. I think that will generate revenue that will help bring people from other communities to Dixon and keep them here and bring their families here.
Thank you. Mr. Marshall.
I kind of touched a little bit of that. I'll actually touch on that in a second. I think the continued work with Chamber Main Street and giving Chamber Main Street as well as the theater the tools needed to help promote our cultural base, that was spent years just building and growing and getting ready to really pop, that this last year really kind of pulled back on, sadly. But I think continuing with that push and helping with them to build that forward will have a huge benefit for our, for not just for our culture, but that'll lead to our economic health. That'll bring people into town. That'll bring people in to spend money in our town. That's why I've also been talking about recreational tourism. That is part of a culture in terms of helping to bring people in to build economic stability by giving them different activities to do. And while those activities will be good for people coming out of town, it also benefit us as living in town. And, helping to build more bike trails, added walking trails, the river and Lowell Park. It's in the riverfront. Everything can come down to the more we do on the culture side will help us economically in the long term.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Mr. Bishop.
Yeah, I think one of the big things is just the enterprise zone and seeing what Rochelle's been able to do with it. Hopefully we can translate something similar to that for us over here. Obviously you have the Gateway project that's out there. And Brian already alluded to the viaduct project by the riverfront. That's the reason that we bought, where the old junkyard was, is because we want to see developers go in there and create something that's going to bring people in. So it's part of the culture, is bringing in new business and then building on those ideas that we already have and making sure that we stay on task or on plan with those things and having them push forward. So I think there's lots of opportunities there, but once again, I think the enterprise zone, the Gateway project that's out there, the viaduct project that's going on, and then just continuing with our Chamber of Main Street is a big thing. Promote that, get people involved. Obviously, coming out of the pandemic, I think one of the most important things to do is when people feel safe, having them go out and be a part of the community. And when we come on these new festivals, I know Petunia Festival got brought up, we should bring people in and hopefully they feel comfortable, and then hopefully that draws crowds from other places, and you never know who decides when they visit one time, this is the place I want to be.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. Mr. Considine, what is your vision for Dixon's economic and cultural growth for the next 10 years?
Well, from 50,000 feet, as my former mayor, Mr. Dick, used to always say, you have to look at it from 50,000 feet. So there's a big project in the works for renewable energy. There's our economic development that's been mentioned, both all my other candidates on the table here. Our Viaduct Point, which has been in the works for maybe 15 years, is finally coming to a head. the industrial park and to the performing of the cultural arts. You don't always think of that as necessarily an economic development, but it truly is a way for us to expand our economic development by attracting people to the community of Dixon. So I think that's why there's such an emphasis from this particular council and mayor and city manager. And I'd be remiss if I didn't thank the exquisite work that our city manager and our assistant manager and department heads do, because that's really one of the reasons I also got involved again, because the morale in the city was a mess, and that they've turned it around and made it a viable situation. So I think that plays in to economic development, how everyone's head is wrapped around everything. And I'm going to just keep taking my extra seconds because I like it. So I'm not done yet. I think we have a great community and we're in the right place at the right time.
Thank you, Mr. Considine. Mr. Marshall, can you elaborate on one or two great things that are going on within our community right now?
You know, it's one of those things, you put that question out there, and right now my head's kind of like, all right, which one do we start at? I think the city's partnership with the park districts is massive and is going to be a huge, benefit for all of our citizens, as well as what you guys are doing at Chamber Main Street. I think, I remember when we were putting together that commission, our hopes and dreams were far exceeded. We were hoping for just getting everybody under one roof and hope they weren't going to fight each other to death, which wasn't play that first year and a half that you can even attest. So I would say the one thing that's really benefited the most would be your organization, not to play nice. It's been huge. It's helped promoting it. I think the moves made there has been so beneficial with allowing people from all around the state to know what Dixon's really up to. And while this last year was obviously a wash, but you guys still kept up on it. That's been something that, all said and done, I'm proud to have been a part of that task force and those two different boards to make that happen. That's been a huge piece. And I think you guys are doing a great job and continue it. So I don't have to call and yell at you.
Well, I appreciate that, Mr. Marshall. Mr. Bishop, can you give me and elaborate one or two just great things that are happening within Dixon right now?
Well, one of the things that's been talked around for a long time, and it always has been the thing that people have been trying to unlock, if you will, is the corridor out by 88, the Gateway project. We've already talked about it several times, but we're seeing that move forward. So I think that's a major positive, because we always talk about, revenue, how we're going to generate it. Well, here's another avenue to hopefully generate revenue. The Viaduct project, I brought that up before, but I do think that's a great way eventually to show off the river and then to allow businesses hopefully to come in there and basically build that up for us. So I think those are two great selling points. And just in general right now, one of the great things is that pandemic, we're coming out of some of the things that have happened. And I think the general spirit of people as we get through this is high. Okay, I think people are enjoying or looking forward to some of the things that are coming, which will be the festivals, having our businesses completely open to capacity. So people need to be comfortable with whatever they do, but I do think there's a lot of positive things coming down the road. Part of that is obviously the work that the city's put in, but I also think that just people in general are ready for some positive things. So we're in a good situation to see those things happen.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. Mr. Considine.
Oh my goodness, there's so many great things happening in the city of Dixon, it certainly will be difficult for me to narrow down one or two of them. But the one that pops in my mind the most, that I think is somewhat misunderstood and not completely made clear to everyone, is the historic Dixon Theater and that group of people that have been formed to work together and build it and make, as we sit in this historic theater that I mentioned to all of you earlier, I tap dance on this damn stage many, many, many years ago. I can still do the jig I showed you all. Anyway, that's one of the most important things that I think is there, and it's maybe hard for people to understand what a payback that will be for our city as we're going forward, than a destination to come to our community. And again, Gateway and the Viaduct Center, that's exciting. But I guess the biggest thing for me, to lump it all together, is the cooperation between all the agencies that we've talked about tonight, that they're all willing to work together shoulder to shoulder and get the job done. And it's not about an ego or about who's the best or the least and who puts in, but just like with the splash pads, all the contractors in the community came together and worked as a unit to make it better. And I think that's the exciting thing about our community, that everyone's willing to work together and make it happen. So that would be my answer for your question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Considine. Mr. Nagy.
Yeah, so I think it's hard to narrow it down, as the other gentlemen up here have said, but I really want to commend Dixon Strong during the pandemic. I think that's one thing that was vital, getting through the pandemic, working with the health department. I think it's important, the businesses that want to be open are open right now, and that's important not only for the citizens, but for the city as a whole. Partnering with the Park District and Main Street, those are all great things that have been taking place, and I believe that partnership will continue to be strong, and we'll be collaborating together versus all of us trying to do our own individual projects. I think we can do bigger and better things with a stronger foundation, more folks at that foundation. Again, just overcoming that pandemic as a community by partnering with other community forms of government and other agencies is something that I commend our current community government and staff, and I think that is something that we're ahead of from other surrounding communities, and I think we need to jump on the opportunity that we have with that, and we need to continue to open and make Dixon, put Dixon on the map.
Thank you, Mr. Nagy. Mr. Bishop and candidates, this will be our final question before we move into closing statements. And a lot of this was touched on again, throughout the last hour plus. But 2020 was a trying time for not just our community, our region, our state, our entire country. In my opinion, I feel that the city of Dixon has fared very strongly through the pandemic, and we've been able to rally behind not only our businesses, but our community members. My question is what are the next steps that we need to take as a community and as city government to make sure we come out of 2020 and 2021 strong for our future?
I think the biggest thing is, number one, and I don't want to get too off of maybe topic for what this is, but I probably will. Check on people is number one. There's a lot of people that this hit in a very personal way, and whether someone they knew got sick or not, just being in the situation we've been in, where things were not regular, people were not doing their usual stuff. We didn't have activities, we weren't in some businesses, we weren't seeing people. The first and most important thing is check on those other folks. And when you figure out that they're okay, or hopefully if they're not, you help them out. From there, we need to live with a little bit of gratitude coming out of this, appreciate the stuff that's happened, learn something about yourself and maybe a way to get yourself a little bit better. As far as the city-wise goes, I think we showed a resiliency. Once again, I'll give a lot of credit to the city as far as restricting some of the budgeting that goes on to. If we see another crisis along the way, that's something to maybe go back in the playbook to use. Right now, it's I'd like to say kind of like the stock market. We're looking for a bullish slide up. We're looking to go up, and so use that momentum. People, you're getting stimulus checks in. Go find local businesses, spend some money, go out to eat when you feel comfortable, and support one another through the rest.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. Mr. Considine. Coming out of 2020 and the trying times that we had, as I said, the city, I do believe, within our region and in our state has fared better than most. But we are still bringing in some challenges into 2021. What are the next steps that you think us as a community and a city government to take to make sure we are looking towards the future?
Well, I think one of the most important things is we don't get ahead of ourselves and that we follow our medical guidelines and take that direction so that we don't get too crazy and carry on. Like when I mentioned the Petunia Festival, we may have to do it in a smaller concept and a big concept if we're not healthy and moving forward. And that's the awareness that we've been through, and not get too excited, and be kind to each other and obedient to each other, and considerate. I think that's the secret to the whole thing, that we have to share and be happy about what we're doing and going forward. So we've done so many wonderful things for our community, to your point, that's made it easier, and I think we sometimes get a false situation of that we're safe and sound and we still are not out of the pandemic. But I do believe that people are really overburdened with that word pandemic and going forward. So I think it's a conscious effort with the team to make sure that we follow the guidelines carefully and slowly and hopefully.
Thank you, Mr. Considine. Mr. Nagy?
Yeah, I think we need to continue to rally behind our community. I think it's important that we have that continued partnership with various government and health agencies to ensure that we are opening safely. But at the same time, I feel they've done such a good job throughout the pandemic that we're at a different level than surrounding communities, even communities within 15-20 mile radius, that we can have things like the 4th of July festivities and the Petunia Festival, assuming that there's no different variants or strains that come down the pipeline between now and then. I think that we need to, again, make sure that we're helping each other out, that we take maybe a different view on something that we otherwise would have thought differently of prior to having the pandemic. For instance, some folks did not want to consider a community center due to the possible expense that may come down the line. But I think being sheltered and being in lockdown, if you will, for the amount of time that the many citizens of Dixon have been in, there's a lot of them that are now thriving and asking for such community centers to be able to get out in and to continue to come out of this pandemic in a safe manner, but to live life, if you will.
Thank you, Mr. Nagy. Mr. Marshall?
Well, in my opinion, I think we kind of set the bar for a lot of towns and how we handled the pandemic, and our administration could write the manual on how to adapt to it with department heads. So having that institutional knowledge for anything happening in the future is fantastic. And also, we budgeted well over the years. So we were somewhat, I don't want to say prepared for this, but we were ready somewhat to be able to adapt to a shortfall like this. So continuing that budgeting process and continuing the very conservative fiscal spending that has happened over the years will be big. And while 2021 will be kind of probably baby steps forward, I think 2022 is when it's really going to be the huge push forward. 2021, you still have some people that are a little nervous, maybe a little hop out, but I think next year is when it's really going to see the bus forward. And working with different governing bodies and different groups to help create more outdoor activities that could be long-term in case something ever happens again, to have more options to be able to be outside and walk around. I think some of the stuff you've seen this last year with people all of a sudden, always, we talk about kids always being inside, to all of a sudden being like, now that they were told they had to be, they wanted to be outside. So what are we going to do to help build on that in the future? Partnering with these groups, working with them to help offer more, I think will be beneficial coming out of this. 1 second to spare.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Thank you, candidates. At this time, we are going to move to closing statements. Again, please no more than 2 minutes for each candidate. We're going to go in ballot order again. Dennis, Mr. Considine, you are up for your closing statement.
Thank you very much. I thank my fellow candidates for sharing this evening with us. And I want to thank the Chamber Main Street Tourism and Jennifer, Matt, Amy, Mary, and yourself, Jeremy, for this opportunity. While many things have been accomplished, there is much work to be done. It's more critical now than ever to have trusted leaders who are dedicated public service, which I am, serving our community. We have incredible results for our community in infrastructure, economic development, physical transparency, and public safety. There is much work to be done. In small communities, everything begins with leadership. Who represents us on this city council matters. I humbly ask for your vote on April 6th, Dennis H. Considine, I feel I'm the best choice.
Thank you, Mr. Considine. Mr. Nagy, 2 minutes for your closing remarks.
Thanks, Mr. Anglin, and thank you to the Main Street team for coordinating this event. Dixon, I want to thank you once more for taking time to hear my values and my propositions in tonight's forum. As you've heard, I stand to ensure the future of our city is bright and thriving more than ever before. We need to seize the opportunity and make Dixon the city that surrounding communities look up to. A place families look to call home, a place investors look to set up shop, a place business owners are proud to open their doors, and more than anything, a place to come home to. As a father of 2 young children, I want my kids to make their I want my 2 kids to make their first choice Dixon when they decide to start their career or open their own businesses or start a family of their own. I want Dixon to be the place they call home. I don't want Dixon to ever get left behind for my family or your family. And with the right people leading the way, we can be sure it will never be. Transparency, fiscal responsibility, and community partnership. That has been my pledge and will continue to be my pledge, and I ask for your vote on April the 6th. Vote Ben Nagy for Dixon City Council.
Thank you, Mr. Nagy. Mr. Marshall, 2 minutes for your closing statement.
I just want to start with thank you for all the Chamber Main Street for putting this together, as well as the candidates up here. It takes a lot to throw your hat in the ring and being, everything thrown at you. We've seen the 4 years of putting pieces in place. I guess you could say the last 4 years I've been on council. Is to put those pieces in place. That's when you start getting the big jumps forward. Big ways, big projects come down, but you have to lay the groundwork for it. Investing in our roads, in our water, into our wastewater infrastructure, creating greater transparency. These are always just going to be good for our town in the long run. But the future is going to see who's committed and who's not with municipalities around the state, around the country even, and who's willing to go all in and grow and prosper, and who's going to just hold steady. I'm committed to going all in for Dixon. I think Dixon's committed for going all in for growth and moving forward and not just holding steady. And I'm going to work for that. I'm committed to working with our administration and collaborating with our other taxing bodies to enhance Dixon to the highest of highs. And while we don't always agree as a council, we have our moments. That doesn't mean we stop working. That means we actually work harder almost. It gets us working together on workable solutions. So when you go to vote over the next 2 weeks, your vote would be greatly appreciated for Ryan Marshall. I'm willing to go to bat for you. I'm willing to continue going forward. And like I said, I think we're just starting. I'm really ready to push forward and really get at, see that next step forward.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Mr. Bishop, 2 minutes for your closing remarks.
First off, I want to thank everyone up here, but also everybody that's still watching at home, because you are making an informed decision, which I think is important for a voter. For myself, you see what you get. I'm going to be very direct with people. I'm not going to be long-winded because I'm just not good at it, and speaking forever is not one of the funnest things to do to me. But I will get to the point. I've been here, I've done the job before, I'm willing to do the job again for you. If you'd like to support me, vote Christopher M. Bishop on April 6th. Thank you very much, appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. And thanks again to all you candidates for coming here tonight. We are in the beautiful Dixon Historic Theater. I'd like to thank the Dixon Historic Theater for hosting this here. I would also like to thank our esteemed media, WIXN, Sauk Valley Media, and other partners. I'd like to thank you guys one more time, the candidates for Dixon City Council, and our wonderful community for tuning in. Please get out and vote, be informed, and be a part of our community. Thank you everyone again, and good night.
Good night, thank you.
We're clear?
We're clear. Wonderful. Awesome, guys.
Matt, thank you for moving that at one point. Did you realize I couldn't see it?
I didn't know that you couldn't see it, but I had to